Hey, welcome back to another episode of the Ripple Effect Podcast. I am your host, Steve Harper. Before we dive into today's interview, I want to give a big shout out to all of you that are following me on social media at Ripple on Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, all the things. I'm really, really grateful for those of you that have reached out and connected, those of you that have discovered the show because of those videos, and especially those of you that take the time to actually send in questions for those that I interview. I can't begin to tell you how much my guests appreciate that. And one of the ways that you can be sure that you get an answer to your question is by joining our subscription-based platforms, which are on Patreon and Substack. So be sure to check those out. And I just wanted to give a big shout out for those of you that are along for the Ripple journey, because this is why I do what I do. So thank you for being here. So with no further ado, let's jump in to the show. Guys, I'm very excited to have Sandy Rosenthal join us today. Sandy is actually a really interesting Rippler. She is a New Orleans civic activist, author, and the founder and president of levees.org, a nonprofit she created with her son after Hurricane Katrina to educate the public about why New Orleans flooded and to hold the responsible institutions accountable.
Now that here we are at the 20th anniversary, many more people are speaking out against the Corps. Stephen Wessler did a series of videos on engineering failures. He said it like this, that I hate to do this because I used to work for the Army Corps, but they really messed up bad. Grady Hillhouse, another engineer, just released a video and a book is coming out next year, and he skewers the Army Corps of Engineers, worse than I ever have. And what makes him different is he's an engineer, and he explained exactly what they did wrong. But it's been 20 years, and nobody did anything approaching that in the 1, 2, 3, 5 years after the levee failure.
Why she became an activist? Well, she's not an engineer. She's not a political insider or a professional organizer. She actually earned her psychological degree from Mount Holyoke, I think I'm saying that correct, college, and an MBA from Tulane University, then spent years volunteering in education and community organizations. But after the hurricane displaced her family and damaged their home, she became very frustrated with the prevailing narrative that New Orleans had simply been overwhelmed by a massive natural disaster. She believed that the public needed to understand that much of the catastrophic flooding resulted from failures in the federally designed and constructed flood protection system. So she took it upon herself to join forces with her then 15-year-old son, Stanford, and launched levees.org. Rosenthal has described its beginnings as essentially the two of them working from a card table while the family was displaced. This is someone who decided to stand up, to take a stand, to get answers to people who had tons of questions, and to really create some positive ripples for her community and for her state. I am super excited and honored that Sandy is joining us today. So with no further ado, let's jump into our interview with Sandy Rosenthal. Sandy, welcome to the Ripple Effect Podcast. How are you doing today?
I'm doing wonderful, thanks. I got out, played a little tennis today, and it's only going to be 95 today.
Only 95. So do you play singles or doubles?
Doubles.
All right. How long have you played tennis?
I've been playing tennis since about 30 years.
Okay.
30 years, yes.
Do you play like on the USTA leagues or, any formal, league play?
I do play USTA, and I also play fun leagues. To me, competitive tennis is what it's about.
Yeah.
Don't ask me to just go hit.
Because you're not interested. You want to go and play, and there's a game on the line.
Game, and with the intent of winning.
I love that. One of the people that is in our Ripple community, Kathleen Forrest, she used to live in Austin where I'm at, and she's now in Colorado with her husband, and they are in their, Gosh, you'll probably get mad at me. I'll say early '80s, but they are like national champions in tennis and pickleball, and they've tried a couple of others. But she's the same way. She's like, it's a sport. You're supposed to have fun with it, but if you're not playing to win, what's the point?
But
So,
I agree. I like your friend.
well, I love that. We'll have to connect you two. You and I have that in common as well. I played tennis all throughout high school and was a tennis coach for a long time. Played competitively in Texas when I moved here, and I just love the sport. I'm recovering from shoulder surgery right now, and I've never so desperately wanted to pick up my tennis racket than I am right now. So, play for me if you don't mind.
Tennis players actually are in a league by themselves. They get back onto the court so fast and they heal so fast after hip surgery, knee surgery, and shoulder surgery.
Yep. Yep. It's very true. It's that competitive nature, I think, right? And you love the game for sure. And do you follow the professional game very much?
No, but we don't have
Okay.
cable.
Okay. That makes sense. They don't put a lot of local tournaments or a lot of the national or any of the Grand Slams on local TV anymore. They're all seem to have been ferreted away onto the paid channels, which is kind of a bummer. Well, listen, as we get in to this conversation, I want to say how much I've really been looking forward to this interview. When I talk about ripplers, I talk about people that are out there making a difference, and you fit that mold so beautifully because you came from a circumstance where your family was displaced because of Hurricane Katrina, and you started a nonprofit because you knew the information that was flowing to the through the press and to this to the citizens of New Orleans was not actually accurate. So tell us a little bit about your origin story and how you started levees.org.
Sure. Like most New Orleanians, I was displaced for a minimum of 3 months.
Wow.
Many way longer than that. In fact, some have never been able to come home for usually or always for financial circumstances. They usually because they've lost their home and that's where their assets was all tied up.
Yeah.
So, but in my case, we were evacuated and displaced for 3 months, and we lived in a town about 2.5 hours from New Orleans. It was
Okay.
called Lafayette.
Yeah. Okay.
And during those 3 months, we found a place for my 15-year-old son at the time to go to school. And my husband was able to work remotely. And I had the luxury, if you want to call it that, of my husband had told me to pack for 3 weeks. And I
Okay.
did. And
Yep.
I think I'm the only person in the city of New Orleans that packed for 3 weeks. My husband's an insurance agent,
Uh
and he
huh.
had seen what happened in Florida when Hurricane Andrew went through.
Yeah.
So, but getting back to 2005, I packed for 3 weeks, and I even brought my tennis gear. I thought maybe I could get a tennis match
Yeah.
if I'm going to be in a hotel for 3 weeks.
Sure.
Well, it ended up being 3 months.
Wow.
And I had everything. I had everything I could need. My checkbook, the most important things that you have to have, my laptop, etc. So
Sure.
I was in a unique position because my husband had told me to pack for 3 weeks. I had the luxury that I could watch TV, listen to the radio, read the news. Keep in mind, this is 2005. We didn't
Sure.
get our news on our devices like we do today.
Sure.
And it didn't take long at all. It took maybe a week for me to figure out, wait a minute, New Orleanians are being blamed for the flooding. New Orleanians are being blamed for the levees not being properly constructed and for breaking.
Yeah.
And and I knew that didn't make sense because our levees are built by the federal government, an agency called the Army Corps of Engineers.
Yep.
Why are we being blamed? And so I started my research. Started asking questions. And for your listeners, you don't have to know the answers on day one. You just have to ask the questions and keep
Yeah.
asking until you get a good answer. And about 4 weeks after the flooding, I got the truth that I was looking for.
Really.
On paper, Government Accountability Office has said in black and white, the Army Corps of Engineers designs the levees, and the local levee boards maintain them after they're built. Well, if a brand new building fell to the ground, you don't blame the janitor.
Right.
You blame the architect and the engineer, and in this case, that's the Army Corps of Engineers. So
Hmm.
I, I, I'm armed with my belief that I felt very strongly about, and right around Halloween 2005, so it's now 2 months after the flooding, I got into an argument with a gentleman from the town of Lafayette, and he told me, oh, the levees were built perfectly fine. Nothing was wrong with those levees. Katrina was a huge storm, and people like you who lived in New Orleans don't deserve help.
Wow. Oh,
I That's what he said to me. And obviously, it blew my mind. Here
sure.
I am, an evacuee, a victim, harmed just like everybody else in New Orleans.
Yep.
And I was being told that I don't deserve help, me and all of us who live in New Orleans. With that day, I decided I have to do something. I have to get the word out. I have to tell America, I have to tell the world what really happened, which which is a little silly. I feel silly talking about it now, but that's how I felt after that day.
Wait, why do you feel sorry or silly about how that comes across today? Why do you feel like that?
Well, I'm not an engineer. I'm not an attorney. I have no political experience. I have no speaking experience to speak of. No pun intended. So I was a nobody. I was just a mom, with who had always worked ever since I graduated from college. But I was a copywriter for a living. And so who am I? Who am I to get the truth out about why the levees broke? Who am I? And so that's why I feel silly today. But nonetheless, I didn't feel silly that day because all I had to do was look around me and see so many people who had suffered. I was one of the
Sure.
lucky ones. I
Yeah.
live on something called the Sliver by the river. So my house was actually 6 feet above sea level, and
Wow.
my house didn't flood. But half of New Orleans is at or below sea level.
Yep.
And those people flooded terribly, some as high as 10 feet
Wow.
up to into the second story. A lot of people lost loved ones. Nearly 1,400 people drowned in the first few hours. So even though I was a nobody, I still felt I was driven to get the truth out and let the world know what really happened. And here I am today talking to you.
I am amazed at your story. Honestly, I think it is so inspiring. I mean, you are more than, just a nobody. You're someone who saw something and said something. You're someone who wasn't just taking the company line or the government line. You were actually digging in and doing your research and really finding the truth where in a lot of respects from an outsider's perspective, and I knew some people that were displaced as well, the information that was being shared was next to none. And the information and data that would be given to residents was turned out in a lot of respects to be completely wrong and false. So the fact that you stepped up to the plate and said, look, I'm going to take a stand here, I think is just very, very amazing. And so I'm in awe of your story and I'm in awe of what you did. What was it about that moment, a few months after the flooding, that was it this conversation with this individual, or was it kind of a cumulative thing that you were starting to kind of the slow burn to say something's not right here and somebody needs to look into this?
The answer to your question is that conversation was a tipping point.
Okay.
It had been building. It wasn't like I woke up the next day and says, "Well, maybe I should research this."
Yeah.
My research was done. My fact finding was done, and so by the time I had that conversation. I had my bag of information, and he wasn't buying it, and but for him to actually tell me that my family and my neighbors and the people of my city didn't deserve help,
That's just insane. Yeah.
and my thought was, well, here is this gentleman who doesn't even live far from the city of New Orleans. He lives right there in Louisiana, and that's what he thinks.
Yeah.
Imagine people in New York and Maine and California, way, way far away, who don't have any information about, or maybe probably less information than this gentleman did. I don't know his name. I wish I did, because I would thank him
Yeah.
for lighting a fire under me. I'm sure that wasn't his intention.
Sure.
And one of the big, what do you call it, silver linings of that conversation
Yeah.
is the people who are trying to criticize you and bring you down are often the very people who bring you up.
Yes. Absolutely. What
Often.
what did what was the so when you guys packed up for 3 weeks, were you out ahead of the storm or were you in the surge to try and get out after it looked like it was going to be a little bit worse than they had predicted?
One of the forgotten things, it's been 21 years, Hurricane Katrina took a massive shift.
Yeah,
It
like a left
wasn't,
turn, right?
it took a left,
Yep.
correct. The world expected it to hit the Florida Panhandle. All
Yep.
the models pointed right to the Florida Panhandle. I was in New York visiting my daughter who was in college, and we had tickets to Mamma Mia. Okay, Friday afternoon, 3 days before the hurricane made landfall, all the models shifted, and my husband got a phone call. It's 2005. You
Yeah.
called people
Yep.
and said models have shifted. Well, my husband's in the insurance business, and he thought, "What models? What insurance model are you talking about?" He says, "No, the hurricane model has shifted. It's
Mm,
headed for New Orleans." So we flew home Saturday morning. I got the news Friday night. We flew home Saturday morning and boarded up the house. Got the dog and my two sons, and the plan was to leave Sunday morning. What Something else people may have forgotten, that when we went to bed Saturday night, boarded up the house, very responsible. Hurricane Katrina was a cat 3.
yeah.
When we
Yep.
got up at 5 o'clock in the morning, it was a cat 5.
Wow.
And it was the biggest storm. It was huge. It was
Yep.
a wide storm. And the thing about a wide storm is they cover more area. Okay, that's intuitive.
Sure.
Uh, so we drove out. The answer to your question is we were one of the last out. We drove out Sunday morning around 11 o'clock, and by 4 o'clock that afternoon, contraflow was ended. That's where all roads pointed out. No roads
Okay.
in or out. And Sunday night, the city was quiet, and the hurricane arrived Monday morning around 2 in the morning.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, two ish in the morning, and then the levees broke around 6 in the morning. So the answer to the question is we were one of the last out.
Wow. For those that are unfamiliar, either because they haven't paid attention or watched any of the documentaries or really weren't familiar with sort of the aftermath of what occurred, that the hurricane hit, but it was really the storm surge that was the real problem for the levees, right? Can you talk to the audience
Very
a little bit about that?
good. That's not intuitive. So for Mississippi, the storm surge was incredible. They had a 28-foot storm surge.
Wow.
We also had a high storm surge, not that much. Ours was more like 15 feet, but that was just enough to expose the flaws in these levees built by the Army Corps of Engineers. A surge much lower than that could have also caused them to fail. And so that is what caused the levees to fail. People have joked afterward, those levees could have been filled with a garden hose and they still would have failed.
Yeah.
They were doomed to fail. It was just a matter of when. New Orleans had not had a hurricane since 1965, Hurricane Betsy. So it took 40 years for us to get tested.
Wow.
Hurricane
Okay.
Katrina, yep, Hurricane Katrina. Well, there have been hurricanes, but nothing powerful
Significant.
enough to
Yeah.
do anything. Exactly 1 year prior to Hurricane Katrina, we were hit with Hurricane Ivan,
Yep.
which tested that contraflow that I mentioned a few minutes ago.
Hmm.
And there were big problems with that contraflow. And a lot of people turned around and went back to New Orleans because the contraflow was still in a test situation. But by the time Katrina arrived, the problems were fixed, and a lot of lives were saved because of Hurricane Ivan.
Wow. So, for those that are not familiar because they've not been to any of the Gulf shore or Gulf states, explain the levee system and what that does and how it's supposed to work for a city like New Orleans.
Well, there are a few cities that have as elaborate a hurricane protection system as New Orleans. There are others. Dallas, Twin Forks, Dallas, has a very elaborate flood protection system. Washington, D.C.
Mm.
is very reliant on levees, of all things. Sacramento, heavily reliant on levees for protection. But back to New Orleans, ours basically creates a three bowls. They're called
Okay.
polders, but we'll call them bowls. And there are
Okay.
three bowls, and each of those bowls, if they fill up with water, that's when you get the problems. And
Okay.
so all three of those bowls got got broken on the outside, and water was allowed to flow into them. The worst damage was the part of the city where the Superdome is.
Yeah.
It's called the Main Basin. That's where the Superdome is. That's where most of the people, property, and infrastructure are. Not saying that the people who live there are more important. I'm just saying economically,
That's where it is. Yeah.
that that was where the worst flooding was, and also a lot of the deaths because it was so deep. So again, we are heavily reliant on levees, but levee building. If, engineers have understood levee building for way more than a century. 120 years, we've understood what levee building is. We have the technology, we have the know-how. The Army Corps of Engineers made mistakes that's going to take a long time for people to forget.
What specifically were the mistakes that you saw as you started to do
Sure.
the research, and what were the
The,
failure points?
the answer to that question is founded in the exact same thing that caused the worst engineering disaster in the world, and that's Chernobyl. And anyone
Hmm.
that studied Chernobyl knows the reason they had that explosion was they were looking for ways to save money. And the solution, their fallback system was cheaply built and it didn't work. It
Wow.
failed to do what it was designed to do. Getting back to the flooding of New Orleans, in 1985, the Army Corps of Engineers got a whooping because they were moving too slowly. They were moving in their characteristic glacial pace. And they got a whooping from the Government Accountability Office that go back there, um, solve your problems, and get to work. You're behind schedule. So by
Hmm.
now, Congress authorized the levies in 1965. It's now 1982. So it was exactly 1982. So the Army Corps, behind schedule, looking for ways to save money, and they selected saving money on steel. Steel is expensive
Mm.
to buy, and it's expensive to drive into the ground to
Sure.
reinforce the levees. So they did a study looking for ways to use less steel. And after they did this study, it's called the E99 study, they wrongly determined they only needed to drive the steel 16 feet into the ground instead of 46. That's a lot of steel. They
Yeah,
saved
big difference.
100, $100 million dollars they saved not having to drive steel so deep. And that was the flaw. Because they were too shallow, they failed in places all over the city, mainly in that main basin that I talked about already, and
Hmm.
also in the lower Ninth Ward. Levees failed there for the same reason. So that was the main flaw. There were others, but those were the biggest. Built, built and made by the Army Corps of Engineers.
Like you said, you weren't an activist beforehand. You weren't a political operative. You weren't even geared around any type of efforts in in this regard, right? What was it about this situation that you felt like you had to step up and start sharing this story? And your book, which I cannot personally wait to read, Words Whispered in Water. The Tell us a little bit about what motivated you to step up and do this, and ultimately what you hope to accomplish by spreading the story through the book.
The answer is kind of a funny one.
Okay.
No one else. The answer is funny. Nobody else was talking like this. No one
People were
else
just
was.
taking it, taking what they
People,
were hearing.
keep in mind, in all fairness, that 500,000 people were waking up every morning asking themselves, "Where am I going to work?
Yeah.
Where am I going to live?
Yeah.
Where are my children going to go to school?" So the 100% of the population was surviving.
Yeah.
So in that world, people aren't didn't have the luxury that I had. Remember, my house didn't flood, and I'd packed for 3 weeks, which is enough for you can wash your clothes and reuse them.
Yeah.
So I had something that they didn't have. But once after I had that argument around Halloween of 2005 with that gentleman, that's when I went, that's it. That's it. I got to do something. I'm going to get to work. And the first thing I did, Steve, was I looked around. Maybe somebody else is singing the same song.
Yeah.
Nope, nobody,
Really?
nobody, nobody.
Wow.
Nope, nope, nope. And why is a subject of a book, but it's but that's the reason I said, well, I'm going to have to do it myself. And my son, he was 15 years old at the
I saw
time,
that.
just turned 15, and he said, Mom, if you will design a mission statement, I'll help you with a website. I'll create a website for you. That night, we went online and we looked for URLs that would, with the word levy in them.
Hmm.
And they were all available.
That's
We could have had
crazy.
levies.com, levies.net, levies.org. We could have had anything we wanted. This is 20 years ago. So we picked levies.org, and name the organization levies.org. That's clever, right?
Sure. Yeah.
The website name is the same as the URL, is the same as the organization. Keep it
Yeah.
simple.
Yeah.
And we launched December 2nd of 2005. And we put up the website. But so there we were. We had a website and we had a mission. And I thought to myself, scratching my head, we need more than that. We need members. So I thought, well, how am I going to get members? Keep in mind, I'm not even living in New Orleans. I'm still living in Lafayette.
Yeah.
So, so I said, I know. President Bush had recently been in Jackson Square. He had just given a speech, and he said he would bring New Orleans back and rebuild the levees bigger and stronger. So, okay, so I created a petition, put it up on the website, and and the petition said to President Bush, asking him to please keep his promise to rebuild the levees bigger and stronger. Okay, so which I now know is you don't petition the president, but I didn't know that. Ignorance is bliss. So, but I'm looking for members, and so keep in mind again, this is 2005. I didn't have YouTube, I didn't have Twitter,
Yep.
I didn't have any of those things. All we had was email, and I emailed all my family and all my friends. Said, please sign that petition and forward it to your family and friends.
Wow.
And do you know, overnight, 200 members,
That's awesome.
which is
Oh,
unbelievable. I mean, even in today's standard, that's pretty good.
sure. Sure.
200 members overnight. And then eventually it swelled to 25,000 nationwide.
Wow. That's incredible. So, before you talk about the book, tell us what the mission of the organization was. Because your son, very astutely at 15, I might add, said, Mom, we need a mission. So, what's the mission that everybody's going to get behind? So, what was
Um,
it at the time?
our mission is to make sure that everyone understands the true reason that New Orleans flooded.
Yep. Okay.
And, and why? Because the survivors deserved it.
Yeah. Oh, that's perfect. Perfect. So, when did the book come about?
Okay, in 2013, I got a phone call from a friend of mine, an advisor who's now a friend, but at the time he was an advisor. He advised me in all things media related with levees.org. He lives in New York, and he told me, he said, Sandy, you need to write a book because nobody can tell your story but you.
Yep.
And this is my response. I know. I didn't want to write a book. That is a huge undertaking. And at that time, I was still very busy doing the work of levees.org. We've achieved our mission now. We've achieved it. We've achieved our goal, but, or for the most part, or 90% of it. And at the time, the idea of writing a book is like, what?
Yeah.
Like,
Like
no, I don't want
huge
to write a book.
undertaking, right?
Except I knew he was right.
Yeah.
And so I actually started working on the book. 5 years later, I finished it.
Wow.
So we passed the 10th anniversary of Hurricane Katrina. I finished the book in 2018, found a publisher in 2019, and the book debuted right in the middle of COVID,
Wow.
2020, which was the 15th anniversary of Hurricane Katrina.
Did that help the book or did it hurt the book when it was released because of COVID?
Oh, it helped it being on the anniversary. That was the whole
Yeah,
intention,
sure.
publish it on time for the 15th anniversary. Absolutely.
Okay. Yeah.
Absolutely.
So, what has surprised you by doing the book at this point?
What has surprised me
Yeah.
about doing the book?
Getting the book out there. Obviously,
Yeah,
I'm sure there's, it's opened up a whole bunch of different doors of conversation and
it
things
has.
like
I
this.
think my favorite um, review, how readers will review a book. My
Sure.
favorite is that it reads like a Grisham novel on a summer beach in Pensacola.
Wow.
And I love that because that
That's
was
a hell
exactly,
of a review, Sandy. That's nice. Congratulations.
and that was my goal. My goal was to write a page turner. I didn't want to write a textbook. Okay. So that's exciting. And what really surprised me is my publisher offered to do a special anniversary edition this past year, the 20th
Wow.
anniversary. That was a big surprise. I did
That's
not see
cool.
it.
That's
And
really
it
cool.
sold a lot of copies. So my goal obviously was not to make money.
Yeah.
Obviously. If anyone sits down to write a book with the goal of making money, it's because they're already rich,
Yeah.
and already rich,
Or
and
they're delusional. One of the two. Yeah.
already like Stephen King.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
you can't write a book and plan on making money. So no, it was never to make money. It was about, as my friend Ken McCarthy told me, he said, "No one can tell the story but me," and so I did it.
Hey Ripplers, before we jump back in, I want to take a quick moment to share 2 ways you can go even deeper with us. First, if you're enjoying this podcast, you'll love our paid subscription offers on both Substack and Patreon. That is where you'll get exclusive content, behind the scenes insights, and extra resources about connections and relationships that you won't read anywhere else, plus a few little other ditties. It's a great way to support the show and stay connected between episodes. And let's be honest, if you're craving something even more immersive, and who isn't, check out our Connect and Grow Ripple coaching program. Man, this is a full year of coaching, content, and community designed to help you become a more engaged connector and leader in both life and business. I love this program. I think you will too. You'll join a vibrant community of like-minded Ripplers to gain access to master classes led by dynamic experts, including me, attend live workshops, group coaching sessions, and get the accountability and actionable strategies you need to build more meaningful relationships to create an even bigger ripple effect out there in the world, which who doesn't want that? You can find the links in the show notes to sign up today. Hope to see you over there. Ripple on.
So, is there talk of using the book to do something further with it, like to be able to tell your story? I mean, documentaries are very popular right now, and your story is so compelling. I can't believe somebody hasn't come to talk to you about, and maybe they have, but that a documentary based on your experience and sort of taking on the system like you did hasn't gotten all sorts of interest from documentary makers or Hollywood.
It's interesting. Well, let's answer your question first, and that is, keep in mind that a lot of the people who made those mistakes I spoke about are still
Yeah.
alive.
Yeah.
Okay. And then also keep in mind that engineers for a long time were reluctant to speak out against the Army Corps of Engineers because that would automatically blacklist you from getting any work from the Army Corps,
Yeah.
which in this country is probably the number one provider of jobs
It is.
uh,
Yeah.
to engineers. Okay, it may be probably number one. If it's not, it's a close second,
Sure.
and that will keep a lot of people's mouths shut, despite what they know. But the good news is, now that here we are at the 20th anniversary, many more people are speaking out against the Corps. I'll give you an example. I know he won't mind. Stephen Wessler wrote a series of did a series of videos on engineering failures, and he said, when he discussed the Army Corps of Engineers mistakes in New Orleans, he said it like this: that I hate to do this because I used to work for the Army Corps, but they really messed up bad.
Yeah.
And it took 20 years. It took 20 years. And I can give Grady Hillhouse, another engineer, just released a video, and a book is coming out next year. And he skewers the Army Corps of Engineers, worse than I ever have. And what makes him different is he's an engineer. Okay.
Yeah.
And he explained exactly what they did wrong. But it's been 20 years. And nobody did anything approaching that in the 1, 2, 3, 5 years after the levee failure. So it's change in the climate, for lack of a better word.
And you're actually a big part of that, right? I think people see the work that you're doing. I think people feel comfortable to start to come forward and explain their perspectives and their points of view, and obviously call a spade, and let people know. Because I do think I was telling a friend that I was going to be interviewing you. I was talking to them last week about this, and it's amazing how quickly we forget, right? It's amazing how when it's not the news story of the day, or in our, what continues to be a 24 to 48 hour news cycle. And the person that I was talking to, I was a little bit surprised by how callous they were. And they were like, well, people that passed away, just it was their own fault. They didn't get out of there. And I'm like, how could a catastrophic failure of systems be their fault? I mean, yes, it would have been great for everybody to be safe and get out of the town, but that's just not possible. Some people don't have cars. Some people don't have transportation. Some people didn't even know the storm was coming. I've talked to a few people like that, just because they didn't have radios or televisions, right?
Exactly. So 2 things on that. One is, no, we didn't know the levees were going to break. Okay. But the other thing is, even if the mayor had gotten every last person out, lock, stock, and barrel, the levee still would have broke.
Still would have broke, yeah.
And we still would have had the damage.
Yep.
We wouldn't have had the death. 1,400 people wouldn't have drowned.
Yeah.
That's the only difference.
Yep. Yeah.
People forget. You're absolutely right. They
Yeah.
do. And another thing, super quickity quick, communication was 100% down. 100%.
For weeks, right? I mean, it wasn't like days, right?
100% down for a week, 7 days.
Okay, a week. Okay.
But then it was, we only had like 50%, and 50% of the time you could get through for months.
Yeah.
So how can you do a search and rescue with zero communication?
Yep.
Yeah.
So tell our audience what New Orleans is like today, and what that storm did to impact how they've gone back and addressed the levees now. Do you have a higher level of confidence that they've done it correctly, or is there still a question mark on, will this, the next big one, if it were to come to New Orleans, you don't know whether you're safe or not?
Well, the one bright side of the levee breaches 20 years ago is that this time the Army Corps of Engineers did build a good system. The Congress gave them $16 billion to spend, and they built the shiny new system that we have today. It was tested 2 years ago in Hurricane Ida.
Yeah,
Hurricane Ida is very similar to Hurricane Katrina. It came in from a different direction and didn't cause quite the same storm surge, but did test the levee system, and it held up just fine. That's one silver lining, that we now have a dependable system. I myself, and I've studied this to death, I actually do have faith in it, but I contend that it comes at the cost of 1,400 lives.
Yep, absolutely. Where does this work with levee.org take you next? What do you want to do with the work you're doing?
Also, I do want to mention we do have a shiny new system, but the people of New Orleans will never forget. And when a storm comes, if you can, we get out. We get out. We don't sit and wait to see, will the system work. We get out if you can. It's difficult if you don't have a car, credit cards, road experience, and family living out of town.
Yeah.
But the city's done a good job of taking care of them. They do now. And also, a lot of people stayed with their pets 20 years ago.
Yeah.
You weren't allowed to bring a pet on a bus.
Yep.
And
I remember
they perished with their pets.
Uh-huh.
So after that, Congress passed PETS, Pet Evacuation Transportation, something or other. It says in order to get FEMA money, you have to provide for pets. in an evacuation. So things have changed. Things are better. There's lots of other things. We don't have time to go over that now. But the people of New Orleans are never going to forget. And we watch every
I
hurricane,
bet you
every
do.
teensy weensy, every tropical storm we're watching all day
Yeah.
long. In fact, the weather, the online weather stations typically crash because so many people are logging
Get 'em.
on
Yeah.
to
Wow.
online to see what's going on. So I'm sorry. What was your question?
I was asking you, so where do you take levees.org now? Obviously, you have a podcast. You've had the book. You're out bringing light to a whole lot of other issues I've noticed through the podcast. What are you going to do with levees.org as far as the organization? What's the go forward mission now?
Well, like most things in life, you stumble upon them accidentally. Most cool things that happened or an
Sure.
accidental discovery. So, in the process of looking for talking to universities about using my book in their courses, I found out that it is not standard procedure for universities to instruct engineering students on failures and lessons learned. You
Wow.
think it would be standard. You would think every engineer is being exposed to courses about failures and about lessons learned.
Yep.
No, no. I said you might get a little exposure. You might have a professor who finds this interesting. The Tacoma Bridge, for example, is a
Mm-hmm.
very popular. The wobbly bridge, it wobbled for days before it broke.
Yep.
If you might get a professor who's interested, but no, it is not required. So Levy.org, 2 years ago, we launched what we call the Engineering Failure Education Campaign. And our goal is for engineering students in the 200 plus schools in this nation, there's that many engineering schools, for all of them, in order to, the colleges must offer instruction to those students or risk losing accreditation.
Wow.
So they have to. They have to provide instruction. And the way to measure it, students just have to show a proficiency and understanding of failures and lessons learned. That's it.
Yeah.
And
That's
we think
fantastic.
we can do it.
I think it's so necessary because you learn how to be successful through the failures of that has happened in the past, right? And I think that is just I have a second company to the Ripple Effect that is actually in the construction space. I'd love to. We'll talk about this offline, but I'd love to get you on our podcast for that company because we are in the construction. It's really a project management software, but it's really designed from an owner perspective to ensure that you hold everybody accountable and minimize those mistakes. And because every mistake, every failure is a risk factor that has consequences. Like you've said, could be a levee, it could be a building collapse, it could be any number of things. And I think that the more you can educate people that you can't take shortcuts and you can't cut costs in corners because there are real life consequences, as evidenced by the 1,400 lives, lost in New Orleans and so many other stories like that. So I really applaud you for what you're doing there, and I think it's such an important thing.
I have found that it's been universally attractive.
Yeah,
The,
good.
the only people on the planet that aren't as excited about it are professors.
Really?
Well, let me share with you why.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
I'll tell you a real life story. So my father-in-law is a college professor, and he's retired now. But we were all at dinner one night, and he asked to be excused early because he needed to prepare for his a new semester was starting up the next morning.
Hmm.
And so he said, "Oh, what is it you need to do?" And he said, "I have to change the dates on the syllabus." True story. So I think that true story illustrates why professors don't like it. Not all of them, but a lot of professors don't like it, and we are not beseeching professors about this
Yeah.
because they all feel overworked, they all feel overburdened, they all feel understaffed. Pretty much like you name a profession, and they all
Sure.
feel that way.
Oh
You
yeah.
name one, they all feel like that. I mean, who among us says, "Oh, I've got plenty of funding and can do whatever I want"?
I have not met that person yet, but if you meet them, let me know because I would like to talk to them too. But you're absolutely right. But I also think that, the counterpoint to that, of course, is that's exactly why failures happen because there are people that actually say, I don't have time. There's not enough room in the agenda. There's not enough effort, that I can expend to educate, these students, which is when the time comes and they're faced with that decision, do I take the shortcut, the easy out, the quick win, or do I do it the right way, the only way that you're supposed to do things? How many people will default to the other side, right? And how many other things could be so much more preventable if you had learned there's only one way to do a good job, and that's to do a good job, and I think what you're doing, very, very fascinated. And you can count me amongst your supporters because I've got a couple of folks already in my mind that I need to introduce you to that I think could help could get some additional exposure at the university level as well as just in the industry in general. Because I think the message you have, even though it may not necessarily be for engineering students or engineering staff that are doing projects like a levee, it's just as relevant and important whether you're building a restaurant, a hotel, a mall. One of the projects that our team had been working on, and then the owner kind of decided that it wasn't necessary way back in the day, actually happened in New Orleans. It was the Hard Rock Casino and Cafe, or excuse me, Hotel and Casino. And they had used us through a owner's rep firm previously, Owner Insight, for others. But like you said, they wanted to reduce cost. And ours was like negligible cost. Ours just held the team accountable. And if something went wrong, you would know who did what. And that's important, right? From an owner's perspective. Well, they shortcutted the New Orleans project. So we got off that one pretty early. And then there was a collapse. And it was because they were laying concrete in temperatures that were not tolerant to proper concrete setup. And then those floors collapsed on a weekend. Fortunately, no one was hurt. Unfortunately, it was well before the project was done.
One man died for sure.
That's right. The actual site supervisor was there, I think, on that particular day, just doing inspection work. You're absolutely right. I kind of forgot about that. But the point being is, that could have been so much worse, say 2 years later.
That it was so that's only I don't mean to diminish the
sure
death.
Absolutely no, I get that.
Could have been so many more.
Yeah,
it was a miracle it would happen to be a weekend.
Absolutely. But the point of what you're trying to accomplish is there's lessons in failure, and if we will pay attention and understand what those lessons are, it might prevent future failures in a big way. So I would definitely love to support you in that effort any way I can. Sandy, I could talk to you all day. I would like if you would just very quickly give a quick synopsis of the book, and then what I'd like to do is wrap up with a few Ripple connection questions. What we've talked about is really heavy, and I think our audience is really going to be very interested. But I also want to use the opportunity to get to know you a little bit, if you don't mind. But share a little bit about the book.
Sure. The book is my journey. It talks about how I evacuated with my family, how I tried to talk my neighbors into evacuating. They were from New York, and they said they'd been through hurricanes before. I said, no, you haven't. You have to go. Yeah. And we begged them, and they eventually did decide to evacuate as well. Thank goodness they did. So it's my story. I go into detail about my journey of how I learned the information that I did and how I developed the organization the way I did. 25,000 supporters nationwide, how I did that, and step by step up until the climax of the book is when we once and for all managed to change the way major media talks about the flooding. They used to blame New Orleans local officials, and now no one says that anymore.
No.
All the major media houses all say that the Army Corps of Engineers misdesigned the levees, and that's why they failed, and now we have a new and better system. It didn't mean more money in our pocketbooks, however, because the Army Corps is immune from lawsuit.
Yeah.
They're immune because of the Flood Control Act of 1928, saying they're held harmless should their flood protection projects fail. But at least the people of New Orleans could throw off their cloak of shame that they were forced to wear for a decade.
Yeah. One last question I want to throw out there before we dive into the Ripple Connection questions, only because where you started, I think, is important to revisit. And I was looking at my notes from what we had sort of prepared. You said, "Who am I?" Clearly, there was a level of imposter syndrome at one point, right? How did you overcome that? I mean, because you are, excuse my French, but you are a badass. I can't believe that you would ever be like, "Who am I?" Who am I? I'm going and I'm going to make this happen. I mean, you were such an impressive person. I can't believe you ever suffered from imposter syndrome.
I got over it pretty quick, and this is how. The day that I opened up my mouth and shouted what I believed to be the truth, I was immediately hit with an onslaught of criticism and people telling me, you must be crazy. What are you talking about? And the onslaught was so massive and so complete and quick. I thought to myself, why would anyone be going after me if I weren't right?
Yeah.
The only thing, that's the only answer. I must be right.
Yeah.
And and that propelled me to keep going. Because keep in mind, I was a nobody. If I'd have been Senator Landrieu or the mayor of the city, I could have written it off. But no, I was a nobody. Why would all that energy and time? I was getting emails from people deployed in Iraq at that time from the military. I still have them, these emails. But that's what it was. It was I either was right or on the right track.
I love that. I love that. One of the things that we always like to do with our guests before we let them go is just give a little insight as to who you are. But what did the 7-year-old Sandy want to be when she grew up?
Oh boy, I knew that I didn't have a lot of money growing up. Okay, money, money, money. We don't have money. We can't afford it. We can't afford it. It was a mantra in my house. So I'd always known that I was going to go to college and I was going to get a good job and make money. And I didn't even know what it was going to be. But
Yep.
so the little 7-year-old just didn't like living the way she grew up.
So you wanted to get out and do something.
Mhm.
What was it that you thought you would grow up to do to make that
Funny
money?
thing, really didn't have I hadn't really cued in on exactly what. I mean, most people want to be a doctor or a lawyer or a vet. I just knew that I just wanted different.
That's
I wanted a change. I didn't know that I was going to leave Massachusetts entirely and move to New Orleans, but I knew that I wanted more.
So you told me before we started recording that you met your husband and moved to New Orleans. He was a local boy, I think is how you framed it. How did you guys meet?
We met because our colleges are close to each other. Our colleges were both in Hampshire Valley. My
Okay.
husband went to Amherst, and I went to Mount Holyoke.
Okay. All right. And then how is it that you decided that you'd settle in New Orleans to raise your family? Was it just because he was from there?
The day that I met the man who would one day become my husband, he informed me that he's born in New Orleans, loved New Orleans, and is never leaving New Orleans.
So if you wanted to be with him, you were going. Well, it doesn't get any clearer than that, right? And you raised a family. So how many kids do you have?
I have 3 children, and
Okay.
all of them are happily married.
Oh, fantastic. And your son that was 15 has now got to be, if my math is correct, 36, right?
Yeah, he just got married a few months ago.
Did they all live in and around the area or?
No, no, they. But 2 of my children live in San Francisco.
Oh, awesome. All right. They have to be super proud of their mom and what you've accomplished.
I think they are.
So you have had and led a very interesting last 25 years, right? Or what'd you say?
21.
21 years. Sorry. What advice would you give someone who might find themselves in a position like you where things aren't happening the way that, that they say they are or should be, what do you suggest if that person wanted to take a page from Sandy Rosenthal's book and decided to stand up? What advice would you give them?
Sure. Something that's been the same ever since the day I had that argument is this belief that was a part of myself that I was right and I was going to stick this through until the end. And that's really critical. If anybody threw doubts at me, I tucked them away and didn't think about them, and I just kept on going. And the second thing I have to say for your listeners is if you ever meet up against a force so big that's trying to stop you, remember that whatever that force is, be it the Army Corps of Engineers or be it a pork manufacturing plant or a homeowners association, whatever it is, that they are no different from that bully in the playground from
Yep.
fourth grade. They're big, but that's it. They're not smarter than you, and odds are you are smarter than they are.
Yep.
And because they're big, they're arrogant and they're going to make mistakes. And you be ready and be watching. And the moment they make that mistake, you exploit it and rip it wide open and make sure the whole world sees it.
I love that. Oh, what amazing advice. What do you want your legacy to be?
I think the what's most exciting is the I was very dogged. I wouldn't give up. Believe me, I had lots of opportunities to give up.
I bet.
I had the Army Corps of Engineers had a big pocketbook of money to spend.
Yep.
They spent millions disparaging me, trying to stop a lot of the projects I tried to do, and so that's like the legacy of being never give up, you
Yeah.
know, pit bull holding on, and because to me that's really how you get anything done. That and reading, a lot of reading.
Yep. I love that. I love that so much. What is one book that changed your life?
In 1983, I read a book called Nature's End, and that book showed me the trouble that our planet was in already at that time, well on its way. And that turned me into the person that I am. I, I try to recycle as much as I can. I try and try to trees and everything. It turned me into an environmentalist,
Yeah.
and so that changed my life. And I'm very grateful to the authors of the book Nature's End.
Oh, I love that. Sandy, you are infinitely fascinating. The last two questions I have, actually technically three questions, but the last two, when you hear the words the ripple effect, I almost feel guilty just asking you this because you've lived the ripple effect in everything you've done. But what is the ripple effect when you hear those words bring up for you? What does that conjure up in your mind or heart?
In my mind, it conjures up how I feel when I open up a news article or open up a book and I see something written or spoken exactly the way I would have spoken it. And often I recognize my own words. That's cool.
Yeah,
I,
that's
I,
really cool. I love that. That's one of the most unique examples I've heard. I love that. What positive ripple can I be looking to create for you?
a ripple to create for me. I think what would be the most fulfilling thing for me is, remember we were talking about my book and I mentioned I didn't write it to make money. I
Right.
just want for people to know the story. The survivors deserve for everyone to know the story, just like the survivors of Chernobyl need for everyone to understand the story. And many documentaries and books have been written about that.
Yep.
So, in my mind, hopefully, if people listen to your podcast, they hear about the story, whether or not they buy the book, at least they know part of the story, if just from the podcast.
I love that. Well, we'll definitely be promoting this far and wide for sure. I know you've got a number of links and we're going to include those in the show notes, but what's the best way for people to follow your work, get acquainted with the book, or what's the best way for them to, engage with you?
Well, as I said right in the beginning, I like to keep things simple. And For me, there's my work with levees.org, there's my podcast, there's my book, there's the engineering failure campaign. That's an awful lot. And they all have their own separate URL. So let's keep it simple. And I've created a link. It's my name, sandyrosenthal.net, N-E-T.
Okay. That's easy. We can definitely do that. Plus, we'll include all the other links as well. Sandy, thank you so much for the time. I am so in awe of you, and you are just an amazing difference maker. And I'm so grateful that you agreed to be on the podcast, because this is exactly what our audience and our, people that see this on YouTube, people that will listen to this on the podcast platforms, this is the kind of, subject matter and material that we want to bring to them, because you showed that you can make a huge difference, even if you in the moment didn't believe you could. But like you said, when you started to get people's attention was when you knew, things were starting to shake up a little bit. And I am so in awe of that, because you're proof that one person can make a huge, huge difference and create a tsunami of ripples. And so thank you for everything that you did and everything you continue to do.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.
All right, guys, we'll be back with another episode of the Ripple Effect podcast. But until then, Sandy, ripple on.
Hey, we've reached the end of another Ripple Effect podcast, and I want to personally thank you for joining us today. It's because of you that we do this work, and I want to encourage you to be sure to follow our guests, show them some love and support any way that you can. If you like this episode, share it with a friend, a colleague, or heck, just put it out to your entire network. It's through these efforts that you actually create a ripple for this show. It helps us grow and expand. And if you'd be so kind, find us on Spotify and Apple Podcast and leave us a review. That helps bring the show into the view of more audience. So we greatly, greatly appreciate that. And finally, just a quick shout out to those of you that have signed up for our Patreon and Substack. As a paid subscriber, we can't begin to thank you enough for your support. It's through this investment that you show that the work that we do matters, and it allows us to continue to do it and support it. So thank you so much. We greatly appreciate it. If you haven't signed up at Patreon or Substack, what the heck, man? What's going on? Throw your boy a ripple, would you? And come on over. That's where you'll find exclusive content, some behind the scenes special stuff, and you'll also get an opportunity to reach out to our guests on the podcast. I will take your questions personally and take them to them and get you answers. How about that? That alone, that exclusive behind the scenes thing, that is worth every penny, maybe more than a couple pennies. How about that? So anyway, thanks for joining us. Thanks for supporting us. As always, ripple on.